Welcome to the Qualified Tutor podcast. I'm your host, Ludo Miller, and I'll be interviewing tutors and thought leaders from across the tutoring landscape to inspire, inform, and motivate you to become the best tutor you can be. The Qualified Tutor community is a safe and supportive space for tutors who love to learn and grow. We offer training, resources, ideas, and a chance to connect with like-minded tutors. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join our Qualified Tutor community at www.qualifiedtutorcommunity.org or find it in the show notes. Welcome to the next episode of the Qualified Tutor podcast. We are incredibly excited today to welcome Ian Gilbert, founder of Independent Thunking, a platform that serves the most innovative and creative minds in education. Ian has changed the way we view schools and how and why teaching and learning can't and shouldn't be treated as the same thing amongst a number of other topics that our listeners will soon be delving into after they have come to the end of this podcast. Ian started his career in education as a teacher, a French teacher, no less, which is something that I'm very keen on seeing, but now spends his time penning his thoughts in a wide range of books and guides aimed at students themselves, those involved in the teaching of students, and everyone in between. We have long enjoyed reading through and reflecting on Ian's thunks. If you haven't heard of these before, you soon will, both on this podcast episode and the post-podcast research you're bound to be doing. Today we'll be looking into Ian's works and how they relate to the world of teaching and obviously to Qualified Tutor, to the world of tutoring as well. We are also joined by Julia Silva, the founder of Qualified Tutor, and our very own Adrian Conway. So thank you both for joining us as well. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Welcome. So just for those listeners to learn where we're coming from, Ian, where are you joining us from today?
I'm in windy West Wales, so in the middle of nowhere, and it's very windy. And between BT and OpenReach, I get 2 megabytes download. So if a cow starts nibbling on a wire or somebody switches on Netflix down the road, then we might have trouble with the connection. But so far, so.
Let's hope no one in the whole of West Wales is also doing a podcast, because that might well cut the connection. So, Ian, as you well know from listening to the Qualified Tutor podcast, as with many of our listeners, we like to start with 2 introductory questions, as it helps to kind of to place our guests in relation to one another. So, what kind of student were you, Ian, and did you ever have a tutor?
The answer to the second one is no, and that's probably because of the answer to the first one, which is I was a very good student. I just got on with stuff. It was sort of growing up in the 1970s in Middle England, in Leicestershire, middle school, and it wasn't a grammar school, but it used to be. It thought it still was. I just sort of did what I was told, learnt the stuff. Learning was fairly easy for me. I didn't have to try that hard, except in the maths lessons. But the main problem in the maths lessons was the maths teachers were too intelligent to help me understand what was going on. I've always thought that I did well with French. I always thought as a French teacher I would be better teaching bottom set. I would be better teaching bottom set maths than bottom set French, because I know what it's like to struggle in a maths lesson, but I don't know what it's like to struggle in a French lesson. So in terms of empathy and understanding, which we'll perhaps come back to later, because I think they're key elements that tutors need to demonstrate in the current situation. I'd have more of it in a bottom set maths lesson. But so I did well at school. And then went to university, and I was the first person in my family to go to university. I never really thought about it, but I had a teacher at school who just could see potential in me, I suppose, and just said, well, you'll go to university. And he was ex-Durham uni, so he sort of wrote the letters that you do. This is social capital, isn't it? So he wrote the letters, and I went and applied to go into Durham University, having really no idea what was going on, and managed to get in. And it was only, I did a French degree, it was only after leaving university. I did a business diploma at the business school in Durham. And this guy came talking to us about what he called the psychology of success, which was, we all thought was a bit sort of, crazy American sort of stuff. But it was just talking about what our real potential was all about. And I it really opened my eyes, and that was really the starting point for independent thinking. It was this, I think two things came into my head. Why didn't anybody tell me this stuff when I was 16? I think that was one of the things, talking about potential, about motivation, talking about different intelligences, which was multiple intelligence theory, which isn't learning style, so don't start writing in. It's about different potentialities that we have. And so it was this, why wasn't I told this when I was 16? And then I had this idea, what I really want to do, what I feel passionate about, is to go back into schools and talk to young people about this, and talk to them about how they can use their brains to become more successful, and things like goal setting and all, just, how to change your mind, change your thinking, change your mind, and then change your life and change the world in that order. So that was the sort of the trajectory. And I think this is a long-winded answer to your question, but I'll get there. I think two things also then resonated with me in the work that I've done in schools ever since, from my experience in school. And one of them is what I still talk about, and I've talked about for over 20 years now, is the great educational lie, which is do well at school and you'll get a good job. And it's far more complex and complicated than that. But that's the lie that we continue to tell young people. And in many ways, we'll make it even worse now, especially around this closing the gap. If we close the gap, your life will be perfect. There's more to it than that. We will come to that, hopefully, especially when we touch on the book, The Working Class, later, maybe. So do well at school and you'll get a good job is the great educational lie. Not to do well at school. And when I talk to young people about this, there's a line which I think is from Bill Gates. He says, get the best education you can and keep on learning. And that's so, do that. Feed your brain, keep on learning. That's fine. But don't think that those qualifications equals the world owes me something. It doesn't quite work that way. And then the other thing that also resonates with your question is I realized, looking back, the secret of my success when I was at school was wait to be told what to do and do it well. So I wasn't encouraged, there was no independent thinking, there was no thinking for yourself, there was no arguing, there was no dispute, there was no challenge. It was just sit there, do what you do what I was told to the best of my ability, and the understanding was I'd go far. And I did. I got into the world of university, but it was only after the world of university I realized there's a strategy that was just going to get in the way of me achieving what I was capable of achieving. Because while I'm sitting around waiting to be told what to do, other people are out there doing it, and a lot of them a lot less qualified than I am. So we need to question fundamentally this idea of what the purpose of education is and what it's for and what it really can do. And there's a phrase that I've shared with teachers all around the world in the last 20 odd years, which I can't remember where it came from, which is actually, I think somebody pointed out, I think it was from a female American naval officer, I think is where it came from. But it's this idea about it's better to seek forgiveness than ask permission. Just stop being the good boys and the good girls and the shiny shoes and doing what you're told and seeking approval, and just put yourself out there a little bit more. And okay, if you upset a few people, that's okay. It's all right. Nobody dies. So does that answer your question? And
Thank you very much. Yeah,
I didn't have a tutor, but if I had a tutor who had been tutoring me in those other things, I didn't need it for my academic qualifications. I did well, but if I had a tutor who was actually tutoring me to be myself more and to be braver and to defy authority a little bit more and to use my creativity a little bit more, then that would have been a good tutor.
Although it's interesting in that when you talk about that, because although you didn't have a tutor, formally have a tutor, you did have someone who had belief in you, didn't you? And that person has shaped your life. That's really important. And I think that's one of the things that I used to work with a head teacher, and she used to say every child needs someone who loves them. And what she means by that is she just wants everybody should be able to see the potential in every child, and foster it and develop it. And I think that's what you're alluding to, really. And I think the other thing that resonates with me is that the quote about the motivation. When you talk about motivation, and I always think about the quote by, I think it was Henry Ford that said it, and he said, "If you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right." And I just love that, because it just opens up a whole new world, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's those sorts of messages about what you as an individual are capable of. And the phrase I use is you can until you can't, and then you still can. So in other words, when you get faced with a block, don't stop, don't reverse. Just you'll find a way around it if you want to. So and you're spot on. So Mr. Archer, my French teacher, he wasn't officially a tutor. He was my French teacher, but he did have that sense of belief, and that's where the role that I think the tutor can play in this new environment, especially when there's government money to put them into schools in England. For me, that's a far more important role. I don't care, and I'm an employer. I don't care about your qualifications, to be honest. I care about who you are and what you bring, and your potential and your creativity and your ability to get on with people and all the other stuff. We in my company based in Wales, we looked to, a couple of years ago, we looked to appoint a young person on an apprenticeship to do with social media. And the pool is quite small around here. We're quite rural, but we sort of sifted out a few, and there's three young lads came through the door, and they were nice enough, but there was nothing that would make me want to employ them. They had the qualifications, so they did okay, and on paper they were fine, but there was no spark, there was no oomph, there was there was nothing that made me think I can put my company's reputation in these young people's hands, which was a shame, because as a company working in schools, we wanted to support young people, but there's got to be more to that. So I think that's a huge opportunity for the tutors above and beyond helping them get more qualification. I don't care whether you've got 9 GCSEs or 5 GCSEs or 2 GCSEs. I want to know what else you've got. And I think I put a blog out a couple of years ago. If employers wanted to fundamentally transform the world of education, and a lot of them are very cross with the world of education because it isn't fit for purpose, many of them are saying, it would be in an interview that when the person sits down and says, right, here's my GCSE certificate or my A-levels or whatever, they say, yeah, that's great, thank you. Same as the person in the room outside. And what else have you got? That question, what else have you got? I think is fundamental. I remember speaking at a school. It was an academy chain. We won't mention its name, but the carpets are very good. And they were extolling the virtues of how so many of their students got 9 GCSEs, A-star, and 10 and 11. And one girl, I don't know, it was 14 GCSEs, A-star. This was a few years ago. And I'm thinking, that's not right. Somebody should have stopped her at, 8. I said, right, now go and work for a charity or go and fail something.
Yes.
Go and do something other than just accruing more of this stuff, because ultimately it doesn't matter. And GCSEs, I know there's a debate starting at the moment, fortunately, about do we bother? And I think my view in many ways is no. I've lived in various countries around the world, and it's not many places where you have a sifting situation at the age of 16.
Yeah.
And sifting is ultimately what it's about. It's saying we're going to, traditionally it's about who are the people we're going to get rid of so only the academic elite can get to university. So to think that the exam system is a process by which we bring out the potential and help everybody make their way on the world, we're telling ourselves another lie, because it's not. It's a process by which we can eliminate certain people from the academic production belt.
Yeah, it's almost a form of social control in many ways, isn't it? It's and I think people generally speaking, most people do reasonably well out of school, but that's not a great sort of tagline, is it? Do reasonably well. It's one of those things that really, I did okay at school, but there were many people who didn't, and there were many people who did a lot better. Ian, I'm quite new to Thunking. I'm actually, some people would say, quite new to thinking. But can you tell us the difference between thinking and thunking?
Yeah. Thinking often is the process by which we seek as quickly as possible to stop thinking. So if I'm asking a question and it's a closed question in a classroom for which I want the particular answer, and quite often in schools, we can, maybe with tutors as well, we play the game of guess what's in the teacher's head. I ask a question knowing what the answer is, and I want to see if you're as clever as I am. And that involves a lot of thinking. So you can think hard in maths or French or whatever. Thunking, there aren't any answers, which is a hugely enjoyably frustrating process by which you never get to the end and always have to continue thinking. And what I've noticed by my work around Thunking is that children and adults will regularly be saying quite quickly, my brain hurts. They're not necessarily complaining, but they are noticing the fact that actually just when I think I've got an answer, something else happens and then my brain goes in a different direction. And and yeah, my brain hurts. And I don't hear children, and I never heard children saying, whether it was in my French lessons or in other lessons that I've sat in around the world over the years, I've never quite heard a child saying my brain hurts, even though they might be working hard and thinking hard and working to get the answer. So it comes at things in a different sort of way. An example of a thunk, the one I use with teachers all over the place is, is a broken down car parked, would be an example of a thunk. Or there's one that vexes me at the moment is a pregnant woman two people? Should you refer to the lady as her or they?
Very good.
Should you bully a bully? So you can cover. Does a dog mind what you stroke it with? There are so many. Is there a safe way to die? There are so many different angles of different ways of looking at the world, interrogating the world that you can come to from the starting point of a thunk. Which people say, "Oh, you've got to use open questions." It's a closed question. The answer is yes, or no, or both, or neither, or something else. So what happens there as well is that we start introducing the idea of complexity into children's minds. And if there's one thing that we need to get across to young people, it's this idea of complexity, that the answer isn't always in the back of the book, because sometimes there aren't answers in the back of the book and there's no book. And if the COVID situation has taught us anything, it's that we need to help children be able to navigate, and that's a word I borrowed from our associate from Independent Thinking, Jazz Amplify, if you've heard her speak. She talked about the chaos navigators. We need to be able to help children navigate a world of uncertainty, of complexity, of what's called wicked problems. A wicked problem is climate change is a wicked problem. Brexit is a wicked problem. What to do with COVID is a wicked problem, because you do this and then something happens over there that makes it worse for those people. So there's no settlement, there's no gestalt, there's no, okay, well, that's it, we sorted that, we got the answer right. So for me, the thunks are a quick and easy way in to help children deal with the frustrations of, well, what is the answer? And what I find, again, in my experience, is that it's the more academically able children who are the ones who struggle most with the idea of, if you go into a shop and read a paper without paying for it and walk out, is it stealing? They're the ones who just like, and afterwards they'll be the ones hanging around at my desk saying, "Sir, what is the answer then?" As if I was if it's just a trick. I remember having this conversation with a girl once about, I think, is there more future or past? I think was one of the thunks. And this was recorded. This was some television program years ago about children if you give children taking over a school, what happens? And she was a very academically able, bright girl, and she was saying, "Is there more future or past?" She said, "I don't know." I'm saying, "Well, I know you don't know. Nobody knows, but what do you think?" And she's going, "Well, I don't know." I said, "No, I'm not. It's not about what you know. I'm asking you to think." And she couldn't process that. And we tend to, and the education system fits in with this, because it's about how good is your school. Well, look at the GCSE results. GCSE results are linked to memory, not exclusively, but they're linked to memory. IQ is linked to memory, not exclusively, but it's linked to memory. But what we tend to sort of conflate intelligence and memory. And then you look at things like mastermind, which is really master memory. You know, how many things can you remember under pressure, sitting in a black chair under a spotlight? Or university challenge. They're memory-related programs. Brain of Britain is memory of Britain. So there's a link. We're not saying, memory serves you well, but just because you've got a good memory doesn't mean to say that you are intelligent. There are other ways of looking at these sorts of things. So asking the child what they think, rather than exclusively what they know, as in what can you remember, there's a place for both. But I think the thinking bit has been left behind a little bit, and this is where the thunks fit in. And thunks, by the way, they come out of my work in philosophy for children. So for your listeners who may not have heard of P4C, do your research, check out P4C. There's an organisation in the UK called Sapere, who do a lot of training in P4C strategies. It grew out of the work of an American philosophy professor called Matthew Lippman in the early 80s, I think it was, who was able to, he was frustrated that his undergraduates could tell him what Socrates thought or Descartes thought, but couldn't think for themselves. And he felt we needed an education system that got children to be able to think philosophically and deeply and richly about a wide variety of topics. So that's where the thunks came from. I was involved in projects. There was a big one in Northamptonshire where I was going into, I think I've been into every school in Northamptonshire, trying to introduce P4C into these schools. And I would quite often have an hour with a group of year 9s, or 30 minutes with a group of year 3s or reception children. And I had the choice of either staying up all night, planning, preparing, photocopying, or not, and not suited. So what the lazy teaching idea, we can perhaps come back to that as well, because that's something else. So what grew out of that professional laziness was that I would sort of just drive to the school thinking of questions that could stimulate the thinking. And I can't remember where I first started doing them or where the name Thunks came from, how that all happened. I can't remember. But that's where they originated. It was how to immediately stimulate thinking, discussion and debate in a philosophical way without having to stay up all night planning.
Mm. Do you think that the Thunking, I mean, it sounds to me like it's a much deeper level than thinking. You know, you as you say, you know, thinking quite often can be about recounting knowledge and information and, you know, those sorts of things. But Thunking it's the sort of thing that I can imagine that throughout your life, as your life changes, your Thunks change. You know, your views on things will change. You know, and I wonder if Thunking is how nicely and easily it would slot into the school system. Let's take the current school system, but how easily it would fit into the current school system, and whether it could ever have a place in terms of assessment, examinations. I mean, you know, that's what you're saying is that the school system really is geared towards examinations, and I think you're absolutely right. I can see that the way that some school systems are designed is they start with, you know, how they're going to assess and they work backwards. Because obviously, you know, trying to assess a thunk would be very, very difficult, wouldn't it?
It would be. I mean, the whole question about assessment, which has been brought into stark relief and how unfit for purpose it is this summer, as the governments around the world try to retrofit everybody into the system so that we don't break the system. But the system was broken anyway in many ways around education, around exams. Because we aren't assessing the things that many people are saying actually now are the important things, especially in the world of technology. I mean, Professor Sugata Mitra talks about moving away from the 3 R's, the reading, writing, arithmetic, towards the 3 C's of computation, communication, and comprehension. So we've got technology able to do so much more of what we used to have to do with our brains. So let's use our brain for the things technology can't do. And this does bring us into your emotional intelligence, or your ability to work as a team and be part of a team, your ability to think creatively, your ability to think deeply. So we have to ask some fundamental questions of the tail that wags the dog, the tail being the education system.
Yeah.
And we don't have vision in our politicians, because they're short term. They just want the exam results make everything look good. And where is our role in PISA? But even, you know, the OECD, PISA have put forward things around creativity and team building, which the English government have rejected. They're just focusing on the reading and the writing and the maths and everything. They're rejecting these other things. They don't see them as valid. And there are reasons behind that. The way that people in the DFE are thinking. One particular person in the DFE who was identified by the OECD as getting in the way, shall we say, of any progress in English education. We'll leave it there. Email me if you want his name. So we have to ask some questions of an assessment system that isn't assessing what we think is important, but is assessing what's easy. Mm. What's interesting with the Thunks is I know that there are schools in the independent sector who are using them as part of their sort of interview process as they move from a prep school into the main school. The Thunks resonate very much with, and I didn't know about these questions until afterwards, so it's not like I nicked the idea, but Oxford and Cambridge will ask questions of that sort of nature in the interview process because they want to see the extent to which, does a dog mind what you stroke it with? That was a good Thunk. You can try that one later. Not a hacksaw blade, as one year said to me a while back in Rotterdam. They wanted to see the independent sector. They wanted to see to the extent to which these children could think for themselves. And Oxford and Cambridge are asking a similar sort of thing in terms of their open-ended questions. So we could do if we wanted to, but it does mean we have to ask some fundamental questions of the nature of the assessment system. Bearing in mind that as we move towards the automation of the teaching process from robot teachers delivering scripts, we've already got scripts in the classroom, robot teachers do exist. I can only see that becoming more of a thing, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing. We can perhaps touch on that later. But what you've also got is the AI, the artificial intelligence process by which essays and things are marked. So we've got quite a few universities around the world who are marking the students' work using AI. Now, again, that implies that you program the AI to know what to look for, and you are programmed the student to deliver what the what the robot is looking for. What AI would make of the answer to the question, can you wash a hole? I don't know. But that doesn't mean to say we don't stop asking these questions. What many teachers do is, I've got my tin of thunks here. I need to find some other examples to share with you. I always forget them. So, can I buy a pound from you for a pound? There we go.
I tell you which one I like. If you don't enter the dishwasher, is it a cupboard?
Yeah. If you don't enter the dishwasher, is it a cupboard?
If all the factory workers if all the iPhone factory workers live in the factory, are iPhones homemade?
Yeah. See, all of these thunks, they come out something that I've read, or the dishwasher was at a cupboard. That was growing up with my teenage children who refused to do such things. And also the iPhone one is, there were workers in, whether they still are, in the Apple factories in China who were living in the factory basically, but the suicide rates, they were putting nets up to stop such things going on. So all of these things, there's usually they come from somewhere. And what schools increasingly do, what I see, the easy thing that schools are doing with thumbs, and I think one of the reasons why it's taken off so widely around the world, is they're just a great way in to start a lesson, regardless of the lesson. They're a great way to do what I call the mental limbering up, just to get brains going. What P4C, and I can see tutors working with the thumbs in that sort of way. Just start, it breaks the ice, it's a bit of a laugh, it's a bit of a joke, you get the brains going, there's no rights or wrongs, you haven't failed. It's not like asking them a question of recall from the previous lesson, which if they haven't remembered it, they've failed before you've even got 2 minutes into the lesson. So it hits loads of buttons in that way, in terms of the sort of neurology of wanting children, of being in the right space and the right state to learn, which is hugely important. But it also, and this is what the research around philosophy for children in its wider, more pure form, if you like, is doing, is showing how beneficial it is for children in terms of their speaking skills, their oracy. So it's incredibly important in that way. And I've found, in my experience, kids who don't normally speak in a classroom suddenly holding forth in the Thunks lessons, much to the teacher's amazement and delight, I must say. And you try and work out why is that child who hasn't spoken in class for the last 3 months suddenly being the most vocal, sitting in the library in a circle with a stranger. And I think one of the things is that you've taken, because there are no rights or wrongs, you've taken away the fear of failure. They're just your thoughts. And if they're your thoughts, then they're fine. Nobody can tell them they're wrong. They're just your thoughts. And if your thoughts count, then you count. And this is another benefit. So you're developing their thinking skills, their oracy. You can include reading in it if you want other things as well. The ability to work as a group, as a team, to listen, to persuade, all of those skills are being developed. But what you're also hitting, and this is what I've noticed over the years, is the self-esteem button. My thoughts count, therefore I count. And I've used it in schools where, I remember one head of year 9, I think it was, she said, look, we know what we're doing with our gifted and talented, as they were called at the time. We know what we're doing with our troublesome oiks. What about the ones in the middle? She called them the lost boys and girls, the grey children. And there's a lot of research about these children who just don't get noticed, and how they can go through almost their entire school week without anybody actually having a one-to-one conversation in certainly in the bigger schools, secondary schools, maybe even more so. And this was a secondary school that I was working with. So I said, what can we do with these lost boys and girls? And working using P4C, giving them special lessons around the funks, seemed to really be beneficial, because suddenly it was like I'm being listened to, and my thoughts mean something. And it's not about right or wrong or what I can remember or having to think the same as somebody else. Actually thinking differently from other people it's okay. It's quite cool. And I can persuade people to my point of view. So suddenly you can make people, you can change, your thoughts can influence the world. I thought this and you thought that, and I've explained why I thought that, and now you've come over to my side of the circle. You come over to my way of thinking. So my words have impacted somebody else's world. And that's incredibly powerful. So for me, that's one of the...
Ian, that resonates really well with me, actually, because my daughters, I've got 3 daughters, and 2 of them have left school now. But they worked really hard. They did everything they were expected to do. They would have been what you would have described as model students, really. But I used to describe them, not to them, obviously, but in my own mind, as faceless students. They never caused any problems. They worked hard, but they were quite often just overlooked. They just went through the school system, and it was the exception when teachers noticed them. And it really resonates with me what you're saying. And the other thing, in my past experiences, I used to work in a school in a Victorian seaside town, and pupil premium was 60%, something like that, 50-odd%. And for me, it was always a little bit of angst, going to the school system and talking about, at that time, A to C's. These are what count. A to C's are what count. And I always used to think about a child who would turn up to school every single day, who wasn't an A to C student. And it sort of really grated on me, actually. And I just wish that I'd known about Thunking then, because actually, if we'd given them those opportunities to thunk, and actually went out into the big wide world thunking, they would have fared a lot better than they probably are doing now. So it really resonates with me. It's quite amazing.
And now a brief word from our founder, Julia Silver.
If you'd like to hear more about the ideas we touch on here, or gain the tools to take your own tutoring to the next level, the qualification for tutors could be for you. This live online seminar is facilitated by industry experts who, over 4 Zoom workshops, will cover the foundations of teaching and learning and how it relates to you as a tutor. The workshops are full of rich discussions where you'll learn alongside other tutors and connect on a professional level. We will teach you how to be the kind of tutor every child remembers. Visit our community space at qualifiedtutorcommunity.org and sign up now for our transformative course. We'll see you there.
We couldn't really do a podcast at this time without mentioning COVID-19, I guess, because it could well be with us for quite some time. But what do you think the skills should be that children will need in a post-COVID world? Because I think it's going to look and feel very different. So what skills do you think they might need?
I talked about the idea of navigating before. I think this idea of dealing with complexity and uncertainty and unpredictability, that there's an inherent understanding in the current education system, is that the world is knowable and predictable, and everything has its place. And there are many parts of the world that are like that. But there's also, as we know, there are many parts of the world and everything we mean that's in the world and the planets and the universe, everything that is totally unpredictable. So what we've had has been unpredictable. Oh, actually, it was predicted, but everybody ignored it. I wrote a book 10 years ago called "Why Do I Need a Teacher When I've Got Google?" and I drew on the work of a guy called James Martin, who, in his book, which was 2 years before that, listed 10 of the most, I think it was 10 or 12 world-challenging, world-ending problems that we were facing, which included climate change and forced migration and issues around water. And a mass pandemic, a global pandemic, was on that list. And so I borrowed that list and put it into my "Why Do I Need to Teach When I've Got Google" book, just to say, look, I know you've got to teach them the maths and the French, and you've got the bottom set at year 7 on a Thursday, but actually these are the challenges. This is the real stuff that we've got to prepare young people for. And it's, nobody wants to be proved right over global pandemic, but that's the message I was trying to get across then, that we've got to prepare young people for that. And is the education system as it is preparing young people for that sort of world? And I wrote the book, I think it was 10 years ago, and then I was asked to update it for the second edition probably about 7 years ago. And I went through the data for each of these things around migration, around shanty towns, around global warming, around the pollution, like the big plastic going around in the middle of the Atlantic. And every single one of those, of the data, every single element of the data had got worse in the 3 years since I first wrote it. I'm glad I haven't been asked to write a third edition, because I don't want to go back to those statistics, because I know they will have only got worse. This sense of sort of fiddling while Rome burns. Oh yeah, we've got all these people. Look, our grades have gone up. Aren't we doing well as a country because we're higher in the PISA rankings, or more of our kids have got a certain level in GCSE maths? But look what's going on. We're going to have a load of qualified dead people if we're not careful. So there's a cartoon that came out, one of these memes going around during lockdown, and it was like the Houses of Commons, Houses of Parliament, and then there was like a wave coming towards it that said COVID. And then there was another wave bigger behind it that said Brexit. And then there was an even bigger wave coming behind that said climate change. And then you've got the little speech marks coming out from the Houses of Parliament saying, wash your hands, wash your hands. There's a French, any of you know your French or been to France, you know, on French level crossings, bear with me, there's always a sign that says, un train peut en cacher un autre. One train can hide another one. In other words, when there's a crossing, train goes that way, when you think it's clear, another one comes in the opposite direction. And that phrase is sort of in my head currently for what's going on at the moment. Yeah, we've got a crisis going on, but this isn't the big crisis. This is just the warm-up for the bigger crisis. So to what extent is our education system, anywhere in the world, preparing young people for a world of climate change, not only to try and do something about it, to reduce it, but also try and live with it? Of forced refugee and mass exodus. One of our associates in independent thinking does a lot of work around climate change. He's involved in quite high panels globally, working with various governments around the world. And I remember him saying a few years ago, when the big when the crisis was around migration was in the news, and when there were the camps in Calais, it's still there. It's just less in the news. And he was saying the Western countries or the developed countries, they don't really have a plan. And certainly in Europe, what is our plan going to be when Spain and Italy get too hot to live in? What will we do? Will we say, oh, well, you're a bit like us, so you're allowed in, but you're not like us because you're darker, so you're not allowed in? What is our plan around that? So it comes back to the Thunking in many ways, by having conversations with young people about complex, not just complicated, but complex issues around these sorts of topics that will be vexing us and vexing them even more, then I think we're doing an education. Yeah, we can still teach them the maths and English, and we still need the scientists to be able to do it. We still need all of that sort of stuff. But there's a layer. I'm sort of looking at a project at the moment. It's sort of like a curriculum overlay. So do all that sort of stuff that you have to do to keep the government happy. But on top of that, let's look at complexity and connection and creativity and care. Let's look at empathy. Let's look at self-care. We know that suicide rates have gone up during lockdown around the world. So let's look at mental health and mental well-being, not only in a reactive way that is about okay, there's a problem, what we do about it, but in a proactive way that says this is how you look after yourself when there we go, my video's back on. This is where you look after yourself, how you look after yourself on an ongoing basis, not just when there's a problem. So all of those sorts of things need to be a fundamental part of the curriculum. And whether they become assessed or not, I don't know. I don't care. They're still important. And another project. And
go on. Sorry. No, go on. I was going to say, it's that creative thinking, isn't it? That abstract thinking that actually is going to resolve potentially some of these issues that you're talking about.
I like this distinction between complicated and complex.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It's important to know the difference between the two. And things can be... brain surgery is complicated.
Yes.
But it isn't necessarily complex. Necessarily, maybe at times it is, I don't know. But things can be hard but resolvable.
Yeah.
Complexity says you might be able to resolve that bit, but that bit over there makes it worse. So, I mean, we're facing a lockdown in Wales as of Friday. So, yeah, we're going to save lives. But actually, unforeseen consequences means we might lose businesses, which might mean people lose their livelihood, which might lead to greater mental health problems, which might mean people commit suicide more. Or, we're going to use the hospitals for this. And this thing we know as a fact that increasingly people are dying from the other illnesses that they had anyway, but we're prioritising the COVID-related stuff over their cancer care or their treatment for heart disease. So we know that people are dying over here because we're trying to save lives over there. And I'm not saying one's right or one's wrong. I'm saying we need to be able to have young people who can enter that world being able to hold two conflicting, contrasting possibilities in their mind and still process and live with the consequences. This is one of the things I've noticed about leadership. My wife is a head teacher in Rotterdam, and she's now in her 4th year. But one of the things I noticed right from the very first year, leadership in many ways is about making it up as you go along and dealing with what happens next. So there aren't books, so much of it. There aren't guides. You get your values right, you get your vision right, you get some certain things in place. But after that, ultimately, you've got to make it up as you go along because there aren't answers in the back of the book. So it comes back to that sort of thinking. And the creative thinking. Creative thinking is about making connections. It's about seeing things that nobody else sees. It's about thinking, well, if that's that, what would that, if I apply that over there, how would that work? So that interconnectivity of the world is another thing that I think schools can destroy, certainly at secondary level, where they put things into the boxes, and history isn't linked to music, isn't linked to literature, isn't linked to geography. Yet actually, those things are fundamentally linked. In primary schools, before the current regime got in, they were going to move into areas of understanding, the Rose Review, and before that was a Cambridge Review. They were trying to connect the world up at primary level, but the current regime, led by Gove and others, got rid of that. Was one of the first things they got rid of, and it was about, no, we need to keep things in their silos, and we will teach that then, and we won't see the links between the two. But creativity fundamentally is about the interrelationship of things and seeing those connections that nobody else sees.
The phrase that
Ian, can I ask? Sorry, Julia.
It's a nice phrase, and I'll just share it with you, and I'll hand back to you, Adrian. The phrase is to get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
There you go.
And that's the learning mode, isn't it? So that's true for leaders, and it's true for students, and it's true for tutors. That if we're creating and if we're learning, then we're constantly stepping forward, and we can create safe spaces to do that. But it is fundamentally uncomfortable.
Yeah, and it's okay. It's okay to be uncomfortable. Like I say, you're right. You're right. Yeah.
But people aren't used to it, are they? That's one of the things, is that, you know, we don't put them, you know, people in that position where they feel uncomfortable. You know, and I think we see it as a sensitivity towards their situation. But actually, in many ways, maybe we're not doing them any favours. You know, sometimes it's important that you go into that uncomfortable zone, isn't it? You know, that challenging zone. Yeah. Because that's where creativity happens, really, isn't it?
The thing I find when I'm working one-to-one with a child is you have to wait longer to let them get there. And we're so quick to step in and help them. But if you wait longer and you watch them struggle, they'll have a chance to get there. And we just step in too quickly.
There's a thing called learned helplessness. And apparently the girls are more susceptible to this than the boys, according to the research, which is, if you don't know what to do, if you look pathetic and helpless enough, somebody will come and sort it out for you. You put your hand up. And what happens when your hand up is up, your brain stops.
That's right.
And it's not my fault. I'm not thinking. It's not my fault. I'm not doing anything. It's the teacher's fault because, like, you know, I'm just waiting for them. So, one of the sort of the lazy teaching strategies, we've had a big push in independent thinking for years now, which is two big pushes: brave heads and lazy teachers. We feel would transform education. The brave heads prepared to do the right thing by their community, despite the pressures on them. And I know these pressures are very real of Ofsted and parents and the Daily Mail and all of that sort of stuff. But to have the bravery to stick their head up above the parapet. And then lazy teaching, which is this idea about how can I work in such a way as a professional that they are doing more of the work and not me. So how many of the things in my lesson can I set up in such a way that they do them, which frees me up, not to sit on my backside, but to do the thing that only I can do. One of my favourite education books in recent years is by a Dutch academic called Gert Biesta. And he talks about the gift of teaching. And he said, and for him, the gift of teaching is the thing that only that adult, and it could be the tutor as well, can bring. That combination of their experience, their knowledge, their wisdom, their professional understanding, their knowledge of the child, their knowledge of the community, their knowledge of this space and place and time, their knowledge of curriculum, all of those things. This unique combination that is brought to bear in a learning situation. That's the gift of the teacher. And if the teachers are doing things that the child could actually be taking on and benefiting more from it, then we're missing a trick. So from the tutor's point of view, how much of the process can they hand over to the child, or if they're working in a small group, because I know that's an issue as well, to this small group, without leading it for themselves and developing and reinforcing this learned helplessness that if you look pathetic enough, somebody will come and sort it out for you. So that pause, being comfortable to sit in the silence. There's a phrase from sales, which is when you ask a closing question, shut up.
Yes.
So you get to the final bit. So would you like it delivered on Tuesday or Thursday? And say nothing. And it puts extreme pressure in a nice way on the other person to come up with an answer.
Adrian often says you let the silence do the heavy lifting.
Oh, there you go. Perfect. Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking.
I think that was. I think it was. Was she called Karen Scott or Kim Scott? But she did a book called Fierce Conversations, and she talks about silence. You know, these are the difficult conversations that you might have in schools or such like. And she talks about let the silence do the heavy lifting. Ask the question and then just wait. And it seems like an age, doesn't it? We've all been in that situation where it seems like an absolute age, but it's not. It's only seconds. You know, and as you say, nobody died as a result of it.
Ian, do you want to tell us about the working class?
Yes, hold that thought. Sometimes children will say, I don't know. If you ask them something, I don't know. And it's just their way of saying, basically, I don't want to think about it, get out of my head. And then sometimes we can try and force our way back through that. But one strategy I used to use is, well, what if you did know? And that quite often gets around. What if we met, I know you don't know, but tell me what, you know, if we met somebody who did know, what do you think they would say? And quite often you bypass that block in a non-confrontational way without them even being aware of it. I can't do this. All right, well, let's do it from the point of view of somebody who can. It's an NLP reframing technique, but it's amazing how powerful it is. I know you don't know, but tell me, if you met somebody who did know, what would they think the answer is?
Yeah. And one of the things I used to do was if a child would say, I don't know, I'll say, okay, that's fine. I'll come back to you in a moment. So they knew that they weren't going to get off the hook. I would go back to them, you know, and they would have to give some response. So in many ways, it was easier to give the response there and then than it was to actually wait for a few minutes and then go back to them.
I see with my own kids where you can watch them think all day long, can't you? But you know how you'll say something to a child and they say, what? And it's not that they didn't hear you, it's that they haven't processed it yet. So if you just wait a minute, it'll come through in the same way. If you give them space to think through your question, they'll get a chance to find out that maybe they do actually know. We're too quick to repeat ourselves.
Sometimes as well, you can ask a question. Just say, in 5 minutes, I'm going to ask this question. You've got a watch, haven't you? Or you've got a timer. Just remind me to ask that question in 5 minutes. So you're seeding it in advance. So they've got a little bit of time to sort of work it through, because we tend to just question, answer. And we need some thinking time. Thinking time is important.
It's a really good way, actually, of top and tailing a tutoring session, actually, is to ask them a question at the start and then say, we'll come back to this question at the end. And if you've got 5 minutes left at the end, then it really reminds them that you've got control of, you know, you're taking responsibility for their learning, that you've planned out a session and that you're sticking to it, and B, it reminds them that actually, you know, that there's the peak end rule that we use in our as part of our courses, as part of the 4-part course, in that you have in the tutoring session you have the peak and you have the end, and both of those moments are real kind of memorable learning moments. So obviously the end is the part at the end where you revisit kind of the question that you posed at the start, and they'll remember that first question. They'll remember you kind of posing that question, which means that they remember the start and the end of the session. And often that helps them to kind of to frame the entire session. So I think that's a really powerful tool.
Excellent. The working class, Julia, you wanted to mention that?
Yeah.
Oh, it was a book, an idea really. I read an introduction to a book on literacy by one of our associates, Phil Beadle. Some of you might have seen his work. And he's just written that one, The Fascist Painting. It's a very good book.
I'm only through the introduction, and I think it's blown my mind.
It does that. He has that effect, definitely. So Phil was a sort of, working class boy, grown up in London, but suddenly realised at school that a teacher said to him, something. I think he had a copy of The Sun, and the teacher was saying, why are you reading that? And maybe, try reading this instead. And he suddenly realised that there's an element by which people from a certain class are kept in that position by the societal offering around them, intellectually and socially, and felt he wanted to do something about it. He was an award-winning English teacher and has written quite a bit. And I just remember desperately wanting to do something to change the narrative. And the narrative that we have, which is a very sort of neoliberal, right-wing economic model of the poor people, it's their own fault. It's the feckless poor. It's well, they've got a flat screen telly and cigarettes, so why can't they afford to get a tutor for their kids? And trying to always this sense of blame, always this sense of if you actually just tried really hard, you could be as successful as you could be as middle class as me if only you just applied yourself a little bit more. And I wanted to change the narrative, especially I spent time living in Chile. My wife's from Chile. We lived and worked over there for a while. And just seeing the extent to which the society was divided and kept divided by the economic model, the neoliberal model, which was practiced in Chile before it was really unleashed on the rest of the world. Julie's got another book there with references to Chile.
It's that lovely story of the little girl who tries to solve the problem, and she goes from office to office to try to find somebody who will advocate for her. It's a really touching story. Yeah. It's in independent thinking. There
we go. Yeah, just that the whole system was built around keeping everything the same. You have to work incredibly hard to maintain the status quo.
Yeah.
And this idea that everybody can, education, that it's a great leveler, that there's a level playing field, that if we give everybody the same opportunities, the ones who deserve it will flourish, and the ones who don't flourish will be the ones who didn't deserve it anyway. And it's trying to just say, no, those narratives aren't biologically, neurologically, sociologically accurate. We know that there is an impact on the developing brain in the womb based on the diet and the lifestyle choices of the parents, including before the child is born. That there's research about that. There is research about the social level and salary level of the grandparents will have an impact on that of the child. There is research about pollution. We know that children living and growing up and breathing in polluted air has an impact on, neurologically speaking, on their ability to be able to learn and process and grow their brain in an effective sort of way. So this idea, and diet, the foods that we eat, we know that there is a direct link between the foods that we eat and then how our brain develops in a healthy sort of manner. There are so many things that mean that it's not a level playing field. I think level playing field my arse is how I write about it in the first chapter. So rather than, it's a bit like the colourblind bit. I think Gove was one point saying, yes, we have a colourblind education system. We don't see your colour. Yes, see my colour, value it, appreciate it. See my culture. And if I've got a working, and Phil Bigler is big on this, if I've got a working class culture, value it. Don't say, actually, your working life doesn't count, your culture doesn't count. It might be different from my culture, but it's still a culture. So value it. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what your grandparents did to build that factory or to build those roads. Let's talk about going on a Saturday night to the pier in the Victorian seaside town and how important that was. Let's value these things, not just let's just pretend everybody's middle class the same, and either you get in or you don't get in. So the book is, and it's a big thick book. There we go. It's a big thick book. I put a call out via our sort of social media just to say, if anybody wants to contribute to this book about changing the narrative, we want alternative voices around the idea of educating children from working class or from poorer socioeconomic backgrounds. And some of our associates from independent thinking contributed, many of whom had working class backgrounds, but also other people from other areas of education contributed, including from universities. We've got Cambridge University represented there, Bath University, Southampton University represented where. So there's a big body of knowledge that is able to say, look, here we know that the current way of looking at getting the best out of children from poorer backgrounds is going to do the complete opposite. It will reinforce them failing. And social mobility is another thing. And real David Cameron, who writes a book, another one of our associates based up in Scotland, helped me understand through his chapter that social mobility in many ways is, and you think, oh yes, that's a good thing. And the neoliberal model is to, let's create a good phrase that you can't argue with. No child left behind. Oh yeah, that's a good thing. Every child, oh yeah, that's a good thing. Social mobility. Oh yeah, that's a good thing. But hang on a minute. Let's complexity. Everything has other. Every cause has other effects. What social mobility is saying is where you live is really crap, and if you do really well at school, you can leave it and leave all your family and your friends in the crap, and you can come and live somewhere, near a Waitrose. And we were speaking to young people who were saying, I don't want to leave my home and my family and my community. What I'd like to do is make my community better. So can I just stay and use my skills and use some of your money to actually make this community more worthwhile to be in, rather than saying, if you want to make something of your life, you've got to leave it all behind to fester. So we tried, and we have succeeded in many ways, I know, through the book, to change the narrative. And I know people in positions of power as head teachers, as teachers, as leaders of groups of schools who have used the book, just said it's totally made me rethink how we work with people with children from poorer socioeconomic backgrounds. So I'm incredibly proud of that book as something that can actually make a difference. And I do recommend to the tutors to think about, especially when they're working with children from the poorer backgrounds as part of the project, to think about the language they use, the differences between them. And I know I see Teach First as part of the National Tutoring Programme, and there's some great Teach First teachers, there's some awful Teach First teachers, there's some great non-Teach First teachers, there's some awful non-Teach First teachers. My concern is that with the current government, every time there's a question, the answer is Teach First, because there is more to it than that. But there is also research about this idea that the person who is sort of parachuted in can, if they're not careful, reinforce this sense of otherness. I'm not like you, and I have the knowledge. I have the best of what's thought and said in my head. I'm a successful person, so you have to be like me in order to succeed. And that they're not saying that deliberately, but those messages, if we're not careful, can come through. It can come through in the work. And the other thing, and tutors have to be aware of this as well. I was speaking to, or I heard a talk by a head of quite an important teacher training institution in the Midlands. And she was saying that some of her primary schools working in a city are saying, we don't want your Teach First teachers anymore because they don't stay. And even though they might be good, they do more damage by being good and then leaving than if we hadn't had them in the first place. So we're back to complexity, that we think we're doing good, but actually we can be doing, if we have a bigger picture, we actually realise the damage we're doing. So my concern would be, bearing in mind that perhaps children from the poorer socioeconomic background, not exclusively, but perhaps may have more chaos navigators, remember the phrase from Jazz Amplifon, may have not had the attachments that they have needed from childhood. Suddenly they find the adult who is doing all the right things, believing in them, connecting with them, having high expectations for them, pushing them, expecting more from them, building that relationship, and then goes because the money's run out. And maybe that what happens immediately after the tutor has gone is more damaging than if the tutor hadn't been there in the first place. So that sense of continuity and longevity and trust and belonging and ongoing relationships, I think, is something that we need to be thinking about as part of the process of understanding how to get the best out of tutors.
I think we've suffered with that for years, to be perfectly honest, and change of governments and change of ministers and all those sorts of things who want to make their mark, and schools find it very, very difficult to plan long term, certainly any longer than two or 3 years, really, in reality. That makes it, the continuity, as you say there, very, very difficult indeed.
I want to start, it's in my head just from the last couple of days, I want to start a 2052 project or a 2052 club, which is everybody who's involved in education to think about what they want society to be like in 2052 and then work backwards from that. I just think that would be, that's sort of, it only came into my head. Well, actually, it came into my head I wanted to call it the 2050 project, and I switched on my iPhone to make a note of it, and the time was 2052. So, all right, we'll give ourselves another couple of years. The 2052 project, where you commit that every action you take will be to create a society in whatever it is, 32 years' time, that will be the one that we want to have, that will be better than now.
That's how we're going to close this podcast. Ian, how do you want education to look in 2052, and what are you doing to help us get there?
What am I doing to help you get there? I'm having these sorts of conversations, writing these sorts of books, giving a platform to amazing people who have a vision for education, which is beyond, it's just about the qualifications and the knowing stuff. There's a place for that, but there's more to it than that. I want a humane society. I want a caring society. I want a happy and healthy society. I want one that is addressing climate change. I want one that is understanding that we are part, as human beings, we are part of a web, an interconnected web. We're not a pyramid with humans at the top. We are part of something bigger, and that is okay to be part of something bigger, and that we support each other in playing a part in that bigger web.
That's so beautiful. So we've started talking in our courses with about 3 house rules: be curious, be generous, and be reflective. And I think that this podcast has been all of those things. You've opened our minds to a broad way of thinking where there's no one right answer. And I love the idea that a tutor could start a session with a thunk where there's no one right answer. And so it's a level playing field, and you're as much of an expert in this as I am. And I want to hear your voice. And you touched on learned helplessness. And we want to make independent learners. We want our tutors to feel like independent learners, and we want them to raise independent learners. So we want them to put their students back in the classroom with confidence to go ahead, feel able to be uncomfortable in that role of creativity. And we have this vision that that learning can be longer and broader and more open-ended. And so we thank you so much for bringing your voice to that vision. I look forward very, very much to writing this book alongside you on tutoring and its place in mainstream schooling, and how it can improve and refine the way that we educate our children, because you started off with the lie of schools. So let's see it. Let's see it together and refocus. Thank you so much to Ludo. Actually, Ludo, do you want to finish us off?
Yeah, just like to say that was sitting there and really learning a great deal, Ian. I would hope for this not to be the one and only podcast that we record with you, because I know that there's about another 3 podcasts just in the conversation we were having today. We must respect our listeners' daily lives, schedules, and the ability of them to listen to Qualified Tutor and you, Ian, for more than an hour. But the Wi-Fi held out. Thank you, West Wales. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Adrian. And we will see you all again next time.
Thank you very much.
Ian, thank you for your time.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks, Ian. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Qualified Tutor podcast, where tutors share their expertise to support the tutoring community. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join our Qualified Tutor community at www.qualifiedtutorcommunity.org or find it in the show notes below. We exist to connect, share, and learn with you, because tutoring is a small job that makes a big difference.